Hey, Rockstar Nation, we've got an exclusive backstage interview with the Functional Health and Wellbeing Center team at Phoenix Contact. We've got Jane Snyder, Mary Ellen Franciscani, and they're going to help us rock our nutrition because that's what we're starting out with the tour. So, our topic this week is, why does sugar get a bad rap? I mean, a lot of us love sugar. I have a sweet tooth, but why does sugar get a bad rap?
Yeah, so I think we could do a whole weekend seminar on sugar, even longer, and all the misconceptions about sugar. But I would say, in short, sugar causes full body inflammation, and any sugar that's not being used immediately goes right into fat cells.
Ugh.
So you can see how if you eat sugar all day long, you're going to have lots of inflammation and you're going to have increased body fat.
So you make a good point there, Jane. Our sugars, we're really putting too much into our bodies to a point where it's our bodies just can't process and can't keep up and keep doing what they're supposed to do. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And the problem with that is the glucose then in the bloodstream is higher, which leads to metabolic conditions, so chronic disease. One that we all hear about all the time is diabetes, but also things like fatty liver, PCOS, as well as osteoporosis.
Wow. And you make a good point there, because the chronic diseases that we are seeing in our nation today can all truly be eliminated just by making better choices or eating healthier and making better choice options.
Yeah, and I think one misconception is that fat makes us have high cholesterol, but it's actually sugar. So sugar is what drives up our cholesterol, and that sugar, the high cholesterol, leads to the number one killer in America, so heart disease.
And that's coming up for Heart Month in February too.
That's right. Yep.
So the other thing that's out there is what's called the three white poisons. So Mary Ellen, can you fill us in on about that?
I can. The three white poisons. So I first want to say, with the three white poisons are something that if we consume, they harm our health if we consume too much of them. So I think we don't like to demonize any foods, but we can get behind the idea that these three white poisons, which are sugar, salt, and white flour, if we consume them too much, they can make us sick and make us experience disease. So we want to break it down and just talk about each one because they are somewhat nuanced. So I'm going to start with sugar because that's the most obvious, and that's what we're talking about today.
Okay.
So sugar, if you are trying to eliminate sugar as one of the three white poisons, it's not as easy as you think. And so I think a lot of people, and I have people say this to me all the time, oh, I'm fine, I don't drink soda. Well, soda is only one form of sugar. There is so much hidden sugar in all of the processed foods we eat, in our breads, our pastas, our salad dressings. It's not just candy bars and sodas. So we really have to start to become aware and read labels to see where is that hidden sugar. And when you look at something like a Coke, a 20-ounce Coke has 17 teaspoons of sugar in it.
Wow.
17 teaspoons. I mean, who's going to put 17 teaspoons in their coffee?
Right.
Nobody's going to do that.
Right.
That is equal to 3.5 large bananas. No one's going to sit down and eat 3.5 large bananas, right? Maybe you are out there, but I don't think most people are. So that's a lot of sugar, that's just straight in having one soda a day. So cutting down things like sodas and candy bars is great, but then starting to really find out where is this hidden sugar in my diet is going to be key to success. And most of us as Americans are eating way more sugar and carbohydrates than we need to. And the only way is to start to look and flip over your food labels and find out where is that sugar.
Yep. And you bring up a good point about reading food labels. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. But, I for those of those you who are starting to zone out because we're talking about sugar, hang in there with us. But really, it's not just about totally eliminating everything from our diet. It's just being aware of what we're eating and taking the time to read those labels. For instance, it's not about giving up ketchup. Okay. But making sure that you're looking at all the ketchup options that are out there, because there are some that are made without a lot of those sugars added to it and things like that. So becoming more aware and educated as you're shopping for the grocery store.
Absolutely. And one word on that one, or two things actually. One that brought to mind is when you're looking at your labels and looking for low or no sugar, don't be tricked and fooled by the artificial sweeteners that are being substituted. So when you're buying your ketchup, you'd want to make sure it's not full of NutraSweet and artificial sweeteners, that it is just a low sugar ketchup. And the number one tip we give everybody to lower your sugar or eliminate it is to make your own food. Because as I said, you're never going to add 17 teaspoons to your coffee of sugar.
Yep, and we'll have some tools and resources and tips to help you with that process. So hang in there with us.
Awesome.
So what's the other? white
Yeah, so
poison?
I'll take salt.
Okay.
And I would say salt is not quite as straightforward as sugar. Salt is sodium and chloride, and we do need those things in our body.
Okay.
We need them for our electrolyte balance as well as our fluid balance.
Okay.
The kidneys are the organ that work with that. So they help filter out the salt to keep that balance going.
So that's one reason when you say about the kidneys, a lot of doctors and information out there is why you should drink your water,
Yeah.
because your
Mhm.
kidneys need to process all of that.
Yes.
Okay.
Keeps
so
them hydrated
important
and
point
working
there.
well.
Make sure you're
Drink your
drinking your water.
Lots and lots of water.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think where the problem lies in salt is that, there's a high amount of salt put into our packaged foods, processed foods, as well as anytime we're eating out at a restaurant or any fast food places.
Okay.
So when there's going to be a theme here, when we prepare our foods at home, when we cook our foods from, the source closest to where it comes out of the ground, the foods that are around the perimeter of our grocery store, so that's going to be our produce, our butcher, fresh seafood, things that aren't seasoned, then we shouldn't really have too much difficulty with adding too much salt. We
Okay.
won't be going overboard with that.
Awesome. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So big key player there with the salt. And then too, as you're purchasing those, I feel like we need to kind of be more aware of what are they putting in those foods to make
right.
them last so long on the shelf.
Yeah.
To
So
be able
right.
to sit there 2 or 3 years. So
It's a little
Yeah.
scary. It's when you can't recognize an ingredient on the food label, you should put the food down. It means it's not something that you want
Yeah.
to be consuming.
and cooking from home and not overwhelming. There's other things, and we'll be talking about this in the next couple of weeks. But there's ways that you can purchase items and
Mhm.
freeze it and
Mhm.
reuse it, or the canning process or things like that. So there's a lot of different ways and things that we can help you with that. But two, say for instance you go and you buy a can of soup, make sure you're looking at that label, because a lot of times those soups, one person might be eating that, but it's really 2 servings or 3 servings.
Yeah.
So all of that sodium, salt, all of that is being added to that
Yeah.
one little can of.
Right. And if you do that time and time again, the problem with extra salt is that it can impact our kidneys, because remember, that's the organ that's filtering it.
Yep.
And can lead in some people to high blood pressure.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's scary to think about.
Right,
Mhm.
exactly. You got to be informed. That is our job here, is to educate and inform you so you can be your own
Yeah.
advocate.
Awesome. So we have one more white
That's right.
poison.
The third and final white poison is white flour, and I'm going to let you in on a little secret. It is not just white flour; it is also wheat flour. They are actually very, very similar, because the key is that they're highly, highly processed.
Mhm.
So the grain, the bran and the fiber is removed from the grain, and so it loses all its nutrients and its health benefits when it's that processed. So unfortunately, so many of the processed foods we eat, whether it's cookies or bread or crackers or pasta, it's all made from highly refined flour. And the problem with that is that it is so refined that when we consume it, it goes right into our bloodstream and spikes our glucose up. So then suddenly we have really high glucose, and our body sends a message to our pancreas to secrete insulin. And insulin is a fat storing hormone in our body.
Wow.
So fat storing hormone, I'm going to say that again, because a lot of people still think that fat makes them fat, but it's not. It's glucose and carbohydrates and fructose and all the forms of sugar that really make us fat, because our body can't store all that extra sugar, so it puts it in fat cells, and then we increase the fat around our body. So we're constantly telling that to people, re-educating, because people still think it's fat that's making them fat, and that's not the case. So as a country, we all eat way too much sugar and carbohydrates, and a lot of it is in the form of highly processed white flour.
Wow. And you bring up a good point there. And let's talk about glucose, because technically we don't need to eat any sugar.
Right.
We don't need to
right.
have any sugar in our diet.
Mhm.
All right. Don't stop listening yet. Hang in.
Yeah, there's
But
good
what-
news.
What is glucose?
Yeah, so glucose is a molecule in our body that's used to produce energy,
Okay.
right? So if we don't need any more energy, like I said at the beginning, it goes into fat cells. So our body creates glucose from the 3 macronutrients that we eat. So it's created from fat in our foods, from protein in our foods,
Okay.
as well as our carbohydrates.
Wow.
So we don't need to eat any glucose. And some of you might be thinking, well, what's happening then? Like if I'm fasting 12 hours overnight, or if I'm doing a crazy 24-hour fast. So our body's pretty amazing because it will make glucose on its own.
Wow.
The liver will utilize those fat stores and make it to be able to use our energy.
Awesome. So really, it's just getting aligned with what our body is trying to help us out with, so that we can be at our best. And I sometimes feel too, and we're going to be talking about this as part of the nutritional tour, is why we get those cravings, why we get sugar cravings and salt cravings, and what is our body actually asking for. But I was thinking about this the other day: is if your car ran out of gas, you wouldn't push it to try and get it to the local gas station. But yet every time we go for that, reach for that candy bar or that afternoon sluggish sugar fix, that's exactly what we're doing. We're pushing our bodies instead of feeding it right and getting it back going again. So yeah, great point in that piece of it. So thank you for that information. Mary Ellen, you talked about reading labels. So why is it important to read labels?
Yeah, reading labels is sort of the first step, because first you educate yourself and become aware of what you're eating and what's in it. So flipping that box over, and I think Wanda's going to provide you with more information on this, but reading how much sugar is actually in that product, how much protein, how much fat, how many carbohydrates, and really understanding what is in the food that you're eating. So first, just looking at what's in there and how much added sugar there is. And then the second thing I'll say is, you always want to look at the types of sugar. So it's really confusing because people think it will just be labeled as sugar.
Okay.
But there's over 60 different ways that the food industry can hide sugar and call it something else. So all of the words that end in OSE, like glucose, fructose, sucralose, galactose, all of those are sugar. So
OMG.
Definitely OMG. It's bad. Okay. And then they hide it in things like coconut sugar and cane syrup and agave. And I mean, I could go on and on, but it's really fascinating. So you should definitely Google it and read that. So you can start to see, oh, that's a hidden form of sugar. That's a hidden form of sugar. And educate yourself in that way. And then the last thing I would say is look at your ingredients list. So if you eyeball it and it has, more than 4 or 5 things, that is a little signal to put it down. So many times when there's lots of ingredients, they're words we don't even understand. They're Latin words. Those are all bad. You can just put a big X in your mind. Those are not good for you. If you don't understand them, put it down. If it's something like, sardines, water, salt, and olive oil, that's perfectly fine. That's 4 ingredients, and they're all things that are recognizable food as opposed to food-like substances. And I like to really think that way. When you're in the grocery store, is this a food? Which is something that your grandparents would recognize, something that came from the earth? Or is this a food-like substance? Because if it's a food-like substance, you really want to look at that label and see what you can read. Recently, I looked up a Twinkie. I don't know if there's any Twinkie eaters out there, but if you're out there, this is for you. I looked up the ingredients, and there were 60 ingredients. I counted. I put my glasses on because the words were so
Now you're
small.
saying 60.
60.
Yeah. 60 ingredients.
60 ingredients.
In a Twinkie.
In a Twinkie.
Okay.
And remember with the ingredients that the first ingredient is the largest percentage in that food and the last is the least. So there were 59 ingredients of words that were not recognizable, not real food products, and only the last ingredient was corn. And means it has like a microscopic amount. So anyone out there still eating Twinkies, you might want to flip that package over and have a read.
Yeah.
Because it's alarming.
Yeah. Stop the Twinkies. I'm
Yeah.
just saying. It's not worth it. It's
If
not
nothing
worth
else,
it.
stop
Yes.
the Twinkies.
It doesn't help. Listen, this can all be overwhelming. This is a lot to take in. And believe me, this is not about, for those of you that are like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be eating kale the rest of my life. It is not about that.
No.
So it's about taking one thing out of your day, whether that's replacing one sugary drink with water. Look at it that way, because once you build up those small habits, they become big habits. But Jane, what else can they do?
Yeah, I mean, so if you're just getting started, I love the idea if you are drinking sugar sweetened beverages, just working on those. So if you drink 4 a day, can you cut it in half and substitute two for water, and then gradually work your way off of those. Something else I usually recommend for folks is switching up their breakfast. So here in America, we usually are doing sweet breakfast, or carbohydrates. So cereals, pastries, donuts, pancakes, all those things sound really good, but switching it up for something savory. So something that doesn't have any sweetness or any flour or, white flour in it.
Okay.
So I usually recommend eggs, egg scrambles, adding in avocado, healthy smoothies with good healthy fat or protein, or even just doing some leftover dinner, leftover piece of meat and veggies.
Yeah, I feel like the sun now is blocking us
Yes.
from the nutritional talk, but we've got some great information